This is episode 24 of the Time Talks podcast, part of the Channel Zero Network. My name is Chris Time Steele, and in this episode, I was grateful for the opportunity to speak to the artist, rapper, musician, writer, actor, model, journalist, and revolutionary Lando Chill. I first got in touch with Lando when we did a song together, but I had always been a fan of his words, his poetic writing, and articulate flow. He's known for his albums For Mark Your Son, The Boy Who Spoke to the Wind, Black Ego, and LandoLasso. He's also a fantastic writer and journalist. In this episode, we talk about education, journalism, grief and mourning, idolatry, unions, colonialism, and hip-hop. Thanks to Awareness for the Music, and here is a short clip from another Channel Zero Network member.
You were born a hunter-gatherer. You were born a social animal, one that moves within the land and moves between bands in a world that was meant to be less measured, less exact. We were meant for lives with more meaning and less consequence. A life where connection and meaning are implicit, where animals have voices and trees have stories. A world where rivers flow unabated and water isn't a health hazard. A world without fences, a world without flags, a world without rulers and gods. It's our world, the world of primal anarchy.
We are here to say that either the world burns or the cities do. We're here to say that abusers convince you that you have no choice. We're here to say that marketers convince you that you have their options. We're here to say that you are wild, that you can be free. We're here to say that there's a match in one hand and bull cutters in the other. And we aren't here to say that the world is waiting. We are here to say that the world is fighting. We are here to say that their story only ends one way. And we're here to tell you that there are others.
Primal Anarchy Podcast is a collection of rants, tirades, condemnations, readings, musings, explorations, response, interviews, and iterations hosted by Primal Anarchist writers Kevin and Natasha Tucker.
Find us online at primalanarchy.org, all major podcast platforms, and the Channel Zero Anarchist Podcast Network.
How you doing, man?
Cool, my friend. How you doing?
Doing good, man. I just want to start with this question. I wanted to talk to you about your interest in film, journalism, and anthropology. And also, I was wondering if you could talk about the story of you being accused of plagiarism for writing an article about the Black Panthers or a paper at school.
Yeah. So the first question is my interest in film, anthropology, and journalism?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, man, well, film has always been sort of a labor of love, I guess. It was one of the only ways I think me and my family really communicated, and it was through film, through TV, sitting down at the dinner table or the dinner spot, all of us in one space, and we're all attentive and paying attention to one thing. And film brought us together, man. It brought us together, and so it was something in which I think led a little bit of imagination, a little bit of credence toward the lack of identity I was feeling at that time. And so it was an escape, film was that escape. I couldn't necessarily articulate myself in the best visual way. So the next thing was to just write. My mother encouraged me to write poetry, journal, sort of rewrite, and that in essence created the passion to be able to communicate through words. That's something in which I find myself best at, especially when I'm trying to articulate myself. There's a difference between articulating one's thoughts and one's opinions, but then articulating oneself, being able to talk about who they are, where they come from, how they feel, what they feel. And words really lent me that those building blocks to be able to communicate. I think that was one of the most difficult things I had trouble doing as a kid was just communication. That all kind of came to a head when I went to college. I went to college for film, but I didn't have a film reel, and I didn't necessarily have any film skills. I acted a little bit. I was in theater, but no real film skills. And I could write, but I wasn't really into writing scripts or writing any nonfiction. I was more into writing like political opinions and sort of like long-winded exposés about societal pressures and ills and whatnot. And so I switched to journalism, and then I finished out, kind of found my calling when I finished my sophomore year and finished my freshman year, or sophomore year actually, and found anthropology and the study of people, the dissection of ethnicity, what it means to be American within the space of like whiteness, what privilege is, what entitlement is. These are all things that I learned through anthropology. Was able to sort of like find my identity through the exploration of blackness, and then what blackness means in the scope of this world, which is really like framed within a Eurocentric colonial value system. I mean, I was blessed and lucky enough to be open-minded and reciprocated that when it came to wanting to learn more and sharing that knowledge. And so, yeah, that was the beginning. That was the beginning of a sort of renaissance. But the story about the plagiarism, man, I was heated. So it was my, senior year. Mm-hmm. And it was this class. I was a Africana Studies minor, and it was class. I forgot the name of the class, but kind of like 200 level class, like, you know, none really hard at all. I had a teacher, and she ended up being my advisor for my minor in Africana Studies. I didn't necessarily see eye to eye with her on some things, and so she gave us this paper. I wrote the paper on the Black Panthers. My mother has extensive knowledge and extensive experience in the Chicago chapter. It was kind of like, all right, well, this is homegrown. This is something easy. Like, I got this. And so a lot of it was coming from word of mouth and, like, you know, empirical knowledge and whatnot. And I turned the paper in. I'm like, oh, I aced this. And she called me into the office, emailed me, said I plagiarized it. Turned it in. She like put it into some app called or some what's it called? Like a program called Turn It In. Yeah. Yep. And so I was like, wait, what? Like, wait, what? This is all coming from my mouth. So I was like, all right, cool. I'll rewrite it. That's fine. Like, I don't mind. Like, this is okay. Like, I'm not gonna sweat this. So I rewrite the whole paper. The next day I turn it in, and she says it's even more plagiarized than the first time. And she's like, I'm going to have to fail you on this paper, and I might have to fail you out of the class. And and I got really heated. Yeah, no, I got really heated. And, yeah, I dropped out of the class. I never went back. Yeah, and that wasn't the best response, obviously. And I kind of burned that bridge when it came to my advisor. She was the teacher was my advisor for Africana Studies minor. But yeah, no, I was really prideful back then. I was really prideful, and I didn't want to be wrong. And I wasn't wrong, but I wasn't willing to take that L. I really wasn't. My pride wasn't going to allow it. And in the end, it didn't necessarily affect me in a detrimental sense, but I think we all could understand that some things are out of our control, and it is how we react to it which sort of informs people around us, but ourselves, about who we are at that time and what we value. And I valued my pride, I think, personal vendetta over what that class, what that grade, what the knowledge, like, could have and meant, you know. So, yeah, long story short, shouldn't have done it, but I wouldn't change it. No regret.
Yeah, I guess it's picking your battles, but at the same time, I feel like a university setting or just most traditional educational settings are very
they have a lot of domination in them on top of it, and there's a hierarchy of a classroom, like a teacher with a podium, everyone sitting down, and that stuff starts to weigh on you, and especially at that age. And then, I don't know, there was a saying from the 60s, I think, maybe by Abby Hoffman, if you scratch a teacher, you'll find a cop. And I always resonated with that of, it's just another form of hierarchy that builds up with people, you know.
Well, yeah, whenever you establish a system and then give a certain person in that system more power and more, in essence, like responsibility, then they inherently believe that power and responsibility given to them in that certain setting precludes that they can act like that throughout life, you know, whatever setting they're in. So a teacher trying to act like a teacher outside of school, you know, that can be good and bad, depending on, like you said, what framework you're talking about, you know?
Yeah. Well, like, going back to, you know, I read one story about your mother of when you were told a bunch of hurtful things in school, she would have you do this really powerful thing of writing down the words and then burning them at night. Man, that's like such a beautiful story. And I see that connecting again to your words. Like that was showing you the power of words and how to release them, but then looking at, you know, the other side of the pendulum of like the power of words and using them, you know, not burning them, but burning them into vinyl or burning them into paper, you know, and then speaking them. But I was wondering, like, when you were growing up, what was the turning point for you when you saw through the propaganda of settler society, or, you know, this global white supremacist society that is handed to a lot of people in the U.S. through the education system too. Maybe some breakthrough moments when you could see with more clarity through that.
It honestly was my freshman year in college. It took that long. I think for me personally to start to follow my own path and sort of see what system of oppression we were under, it was definitely freshman year of college, but the start of that was definitely sophomore year of high school. I had this teacher, his name was Ernesto Saldivar. We read this book called Always Running. I forgot the first name of the author, but the last name was Rodriguez. And it was, and I had never been privy to a story like this, but it was like LA Chicano gang life story about this boy moving through 1980s, like LA, like becoming a man and being in such a privileged place that my mom put me in due to her education of an oppressive system, the oppressive system we call our educational tracks. I was able to have like a very diverse, you know, upbringing and educational experience. And so when I'm in high school, I see people from all walks of life, all creeds, colors, sexual orientations, and I'm thinking, this is how the world is trending. You know, I'm getting older, I'm hearing things, seeing things, but my reality is within this bubble of entitlement due to, like, you know, due to access. I mean, due to the knowledge to be able to access like a utopia in essence, or an oasis like this for people of color. And so I remember that was sort of shattered in that class after we read that book, because we started to talk about the disparities that were present within our school, let alone Chicago. And it starts to hit me why you could tell when you were going to get to black neighborhood, when you were going to get to a Mexican neighborhood, what the difference was between an affluent neighborhood and a so-called hood, you know, what that meant, what redlining was, what gerrymandering was. And I had a hard time coming to terms with that as a high schooler, you know, because you are, and I was, in a way, a walking embodiment of what opportunity and access can be for people of color within America. And I think that I know it skewed my framework a lot. And so it wasn't until I kind of had multiple discussions with the teacher and then my other language arts teacher at the time, William McHenry. And I went to college, and I come back after that first year, and I had taken this in the anthropology class, which really inspired my love for anthropology. The class was called Race, Ethnicity, and the American Dream. I come back to high school, you know, my old high school, and I'm like, yo, I'm so sorry. Like, you guys were so right. I was so wrong. This place is it's in essence a prison, but it's also like a prison of the mind. And when you have access to not only knowledge, but like people who are able to articulate it in a way in which moves past, I think, some of the male privilege and like misogyny, like we're privy to it as far as like being males in society, man, like the door opened up, and a lot of intersectionality between race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, a lot of that intersectionality became apparent. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm blessed to be able to, you know, have this knowledge. I'm blessed to be able to share this knowledge. I'm blessed, you know, to be able to understand it, because I don't think I would be, one, who I am today without it, and two, I don't think I would be here, honestly.
Man, that's deep. Yeah, and I'm a white male, and me learning more about that and reflecting on that from people who called me out and schooled me, it realized that sometimes, or depending on what community I'm in, just my presence was an act of violence, or maybe me chiming into a conversation was like an added point of violence to people who are always marginalized. And then me learning more about that, I think it helps me not hurt others, and also heal myself by being in community with others. A white male doesn't always need to have this voice in this conversation. They need to be listening, and that stuff has been a blessing for me, like from my point of view. And that ties into my next question with the role of art with radicalization. Like, if you think it has a role, if it doesn't, or probably somewhere in between. And going back to when, like, I started becoming more lucid of things, it was actually at a young age. This goes back to quality as well. Do you remember that group, Mood?
Mood?
Yeah.
No. Explain.
Okay. So Mood was from Cincinnati, and it was Main Flow and Dante. And these dudes, I got the record because they had Quali on it, and this is where Quali met high tech back in the day. Shit. And I bought this album, and I got it because I had Quali, and I was like, wow, these guys are sweet. And they had the record label was called Wanna Battle, and they had a phone number in there, and I called it one day, and Main Flow answered. And I was just this 12-year-old kid, and I was like, I'm doing this hoops and hip hop tournament. I wanna know if you guys have a banner, and Main Flow just sent me one. And then I was this young kid, and then Main Flow was like, you're on the team now. And, I'm this 12-year-old kid from Denver. I'm, like, hyped. And then they came to town, like, 1 year later with this film director named Tanya Martinez. And she did this movie about Mumia Abu-Jamal called Voice of the Voiceless. And Main Flow, they, like, picked me up from my house. My mom was scared. She's like, you're going to go hang out with all these rappers? I was like, yeah, they want me to hang out. I'm going to sell their merch. And I got schooled that night, man. So I get taken to this film showing. Dead Prez is there, Medusa, Last Emperor, J. Rule the Damager, and I'm like in this back room hanging out with them. They're playing like Gran Turismo, and they're like schooling me on whiteness. And I'm this young kid, man. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. And I was rapping at that time too. And then they even let me get on stage at night and like spit a verse. That was just like a life-changing moment for me. And I learned so much because it's something I wasn't getting from school. Like, they were telling me about Nat Turner. They wrote down all these things. And that was something that really changed me and then changed how I saw school. But, I was wondering, like art and radicalization for you.
Like,
if you feel like art has that role, or like, did it have that role for you? I feel like mine was a little bit more intense because it wasn't just listening to music. Like, I had actual, like, intervention kind of. with the art form?
Oh, guaranteed. I mean, art is how I think a lot of people, especially like myself, most namely, in the scope of this conversation, like that's how I like am able to articulate myself, you know? Like I think art is spectrumless, but art is inherently radical. You know, I think having the ability to interpret something someone created in many different ways, you know? There are only certain ways one can interpret certain things, you know, like an incident, an action, but art kind of has this limitless spectrum of interpretation that when you feel like you have no voice, there is a voice. When you feel like when it's dangerous to be able to speak about what you need to speak on, art is that remedy to be able to be like subversive in the way in which moves around the oppression and is able to like blend in reality of like self with reality of the world. And I think those can be two different things, which is why I think life, art, through the same coin, are both radical in nature and in substance.
Yeah, and it's very it's transformational too, I guess. Like have you ever written a song that you thought was going to be like this hard-hitting political manifesto or really deep poetic song, but then it was like another verse on that song or even a whole different song that did the same thing for someone else? Like that's kind of like the beauty of art. You never know how it's going to hit the listener. It's so subjective, you know?
Yes, sir. I think Coroner comes to mind. You know, it was this very personal, very much like the state of mind of where I was at when I was kind of flailing a little bit through academia and trying to find like my own people and like representation within the desert. And that song became, this something bigger, something bigger beyond the lines of like depression, beyond the lines of self-identity, beyond the lines of friendship. It became a sort of critique on social media, how we interact with each other.
Oh yeah, like the blue check mark or in there.
Yeah, what it means to be a friend. I mean, that was before I even, I guess, was even thinking about creating politically charged, music.
Man, that was something I love that track.
And that's something that people glean from that I had no intention on creating.
Mm-hmm.
That whole first album was really like a love letter, honestly, a love letter to myself and my father.
Yeah, it was like I've seen you say it it was like a form of grieving, but also like a form of writing to your father.
Exactly.
And that's a beautiful record, man.
Man, I appreciate that. It was an incredible few years writing that.
Mm-hmm.
A very incredible, but also like tumultuous few years writing that. So, man, I'm glad it spawned this career, but I'm also glad it does something for people other than me. I think that's something that musicians really want. You know what I'm saying? Is when we create, we don't necessarily create for ourselves anymore to a certain extent. We have I guess you can call it a greater purpose, but I think we have higher range than we think we do.
Yeah. And we also don't have as much control as we think we do.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And well, when I was listening to this album, when you made that album, you were in your early 20s?
Yeah. I was 23, 24, around. I'm 28 now. What was it, 20? Damn, I was Yeah, I'm 23. Yeah, 23, 22. Around 2014.
Yeah, no, well, I was thinking about that from like a psychological perspective because I know a lot of trauma from youth. It comes up, they say, when you're 19, 22, like all childhood trauma just surfaces. And like I dealt with that myself when I was that age, and I was reflecting on it. It was crazy. And I thought when I heard that record that you made, I was like, man, this is like so healing for him probably too, and like processing that trauma. And it's a beautiful thing that you were able to take your art, heal yourself, heal others. I mean, that's the purpose of art, I feel.
Man, it really is, through any like form of like communication, there's got to be healing, there's got to be access, there's got to be, a lot of things. And I think, like you said, the best art comes from a place of honesty, a place of intention, a true place of intention.
Well, this next question, it's funny, it ties in with Coroner, I feel. I thought about Coroner when I read this article, Will Idolatry Survive COVID-19, that you wrote. And you talk about the blue check mark in the article, and I was like, that's a Coroner bar right there. And so I just want to read a piece of this article, because I really want to shout out your journalism, and the writing is awesome, and it's refreshing to see poetic type writing and also narrative writing in journalism.
Appreciate you.
That's what you do. So the idea of celebrity presence being the oasis in the midst of COVID-19 is possible because of the capitalization of self as a, quote, brand and the over-identification of self as celebrities that inspire us. Anyone with a blue check is not only a beacon of supposed societal importance, but also privy to credibility enforcing private players club, a caste-based consumerist model that's found on almost every social media platform. Nuances fertilize those spaces, sprouting devotion to outrage when the realities underserved Americans face don't meet the expectations our local and federal governments fail to live up to. Our politicians and artists whose celebrity and artistic expression are intrinsically tied to other people's creativity or appraisal are at a crossroads with their own self-importance and what they actually bring societal growth. That's deep. I was wondering if you could kind of speak on this article and some ruminations you've had since then.
Of course. I mean, I think especially when the pandemic began and a lot of us were sort of forced to come to terms with what we bring to this world and not only what we bring, but what we do in a positive aspect for this world, like our purpose, our intention, and when that becomes very limited, when that is pigeonholed into something in which changes the hierarchy of importance, when essential now is an umbrella that includes some of these people who feel as though they are idols, along with actual essential workers who are now only deemed essential because of consumption. It was sort of like this realization that the facade we are building, intent and importance, revenue, identity, this facade we're building it on can come crashing down at any moment. And whatever system we were under before everything kind of turned on its head, it's not necessarily applicable anymore. I think it was understanding the importance of self through isolation, understanding the purpose of some of the people we idolize, and seeing that they are just as lost, just as one-sided as they may seem. I think, especially with cancel culture, how someone isn't allowed the dualism we allow ourselves, so as idolatry becomes this sort of black or white of you are this until you do something like this. It was a really interesting look at what we truly bring to this world. What is important? Is it status? Is it knowledge? Or is it actual physical manifestation of growth, of joy? And so I think it was a really hard look at what a celebrity, and I say celebrity as in, the blue check, what people actually bring to this world. Are you just a piece of, I guess, are you a shiny object, or are you a book? Mm-hmm. Do you signify something, or are you flowing along the path of what consumption signifies for you? Are you lending and using your power, your responsibility to further anything for anyone else, or are you just sort of pontificating into the useless sort of like void of what half of the internet is? It really begs to question the responsibility of self, and if we really have a responsibility for others or not, and what that idolatry allows for. I feel like there's a facade that that idolatry allows to continue to be able to shirk that responsibility. You know what I'm saying? To shirk that, a lot of what I was talking about in that article, of intention, of not being so materialistic or capitalistic, not selling like yourself, but selling knowledge, and not even selling knowledge, but giving it away. There are different levels to it, and it's all very nuanced. I don't know, it was a fun article to write. It was a fun article to think about. I still think about it to a greater extent, just because of, I guess, how layered the facade is behind our online personas, followers, blue check marks, likes, those things can be manipulated. And so I guess that's where the real question comes, is like, with your facade built up, what can that do for the greater good if the people who follow you aren't real, if the people who like your shit aren't real, if you aren't real yourself? We can have all the greatest intention in the world, but how we go about that intention really informs a lot of us, but informs, the universe on how we move. Idols, and a lot of our idols move real suspect nowadays. Real suspect.
I feel like this article, it shows that civilization is a veneer that we have going, and it's thin, and all that idolatry and social media is tied into it. It's a branch of it. The other flip side I had to this article that made me think about, we went another layer deeper into a dangerous rabbit hole. And the first one that I'm talking about, the first layer of danger, is this whole President 45 hashtag resistance, which was these liberals who were being empowered by railing against the system and saying they don't like Trump, but then idolizing people like James Comey, who was going on talk shows, and he was now this liberal powerhouse, but he was behind government spying, FBI, and Standing Rock. And then you had people like Stephen King and Ellen talking about Robert Mueller, and people wearing shirts like "God protect Robert Mueller," and people wanted to get back to this, quote, normal U.S. empire, that was a good empire that, they're saying under Obama. But they want to get back to this normal, which was a domination of countries for oil and mass murder, ecological death, surveillance, drone killings. But then COVID came, and now people are saying they want to go back to that normal. And pre-COVID, and it wasn't. And I feel like we're 2 layers deeper in the matrix now.
Well, yeah, because it's really the question is who was it safe for? It was safe for the people who had the privilege to, speak as if things were normal before. You know what I'm saying? That's what entitlement in essence does. Mm-hmm. It allows for imperialism to be seen as normality. You know what I'm saying? When imperialism has been the driving force behind a lot, if not the entirety of our world's oppression and our current, like, colonial state. I mean, like, if a lot of countries weren't so imperialistic and built on manifest destiny and colonialism, I mean, like, where would we be? You know, we would, to me, theoretically, we could be in a better place, but the theoretically is a prefix because I speak from my experience, and that is the Black experience, and so that is direct contradiction to colonialism and imperialism. You know what I'm saying? So I could say, you know, oh, we'd be in a better place, but could Ellen, you know, or Stephen King be in a better place with imperialism and Eurocentric values and beauty standards and colonialism if that was not the mainstay of American society? You know, who knows? And so, like you said, we're 2 levels deeper into the matrix, but, you know, I like to call the matrix is really like ignorance, you know, the privilege of ignorance. It is, we are in a framework which is an anomaly in a way because a lot of the world has been ravaged by imperialism and lives in a totally different framework than we do. But we are, through social media and popular culture, we are seen either as attainable or accessible or as the framework for everyone to sort of follow, you know, which is, I think, why it is going to be extremely interesting to see imperialism come in a different form from other countries when American imperialism ceases to be the driving force behind not only like the world's economy but the world culture. I mean, we stop like our normal is having military bases and embassies all over the world, right? That's our normal. Like, what if the new normal becomes now Russia, India, China has bases, military bases, and embassies all over the world as well? Is that imperialism or is that normal? Since that is something that we engage in, you know. And if we feel like that is imperialism and we feel threatened, does that say something about our privilege in being historically imperialistic and historically, I don't want to say the golden child, but in essence, like the example to follow when it comes to creating a better economy, power dynamics. I mean, like controlling labor forces. I mean, like what then? You know?
Yeah, the dangerous precedents that get set.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, like that comes from. It's just crazy. Like, imagine being able to be a part of a country that used free labor from different peoples all over the world. We can go to as recent as Japanese and Chinese folks for the railroads, to chattel slavery, to Mexican and native indigenous peoples. I mean, like hundreds and hundreds of years of free labor. Imagine if every country had the chance to be built on free, quote unquote free labor, because it wasn't necessarily free for us. We were the ones dying, paying blood, sweat, and tears for this imperialism we now call America, or now, you know. But you know, like, imagine if every country had that sort of leg up, you know. And that's the sort of like framework that we're working from, that we don't allow others. We don't allow others that sort of same leeway, but we also like forget that we've always had a leg up, and the leg up has been in tandem with oppression, in tandem with, you know, a higher price labor force dominating a lower price labor force. And how is that stratified when it comes to race and gender?
Man, and this ties into your next article, which is Unionize or Die, the next Great Depression in an Age of Pandemic.
I really feel like this just this compounds that even more, like about what you're talking about just in the U.S. from this perspective. But not to mention when we're talking about essential workers like Instacart and these people who are being put at danger. But now you've been seeing this turn towards the violence against agricultural and migrant workers who've been suffering the brunt under the Trump administration, been going after them, even blaming them for COVID outbreaks. And you're seeing this same white supremacist structures just reproducing itself. And you speak about unionization, and it's a really deep article. It's a good article, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed.
I mean, workers' rights are like some of the most important and under attack rights we have, like right now. I mean, when you look at, especially like migrant worker rights, how they have no standing within federal or mutual aid. Well, really federal aid. Mutual aid sort of like has to come from the community, but it's hard to like rely on a community in which is marginalized and doesn't necessarily have an economic foot to stand on to be able to create that form of mutual aid. But I digress. Workers' rights, especially within the age of automation, I think the lack of understanding when it comes to, I think the differing states' rights when it comes to occupational rights and stuff like that. I think it's legitimately. Sorry, like a bunch of birds like fighting right next to me. You hear that?
Yeah.
I'm like, they were getting close. I started to move away. Like, all right. And now they get height right next to this tree.
They're adding into the combo.
I know. Yeah. Okay. That's okay. Now they're gone. Workers' rights, super, super, super important. I mean, being black, knowing what it means to make less than. You know, there has to be some sort of policy put in place to be able to protect the people who have been marginalized from the dawn of like this country's inception. And so those usually being stratified toward people of color and or those of a certain hue, it then behooves us to be able to protect those people, because we have to understand that capitalism isn't necessarily inherently racist per se. I say that with a debate in mind behind like whether or not capitalism is inherently racist, but understanding that there can be a higher price labor force and a lower price labor force. That, you know, you can have a poor white person, or you can have a rich black person, or, you know, so these labor forces don't necessarily have to be stratified along the lines of race or ethnicity or religion, but along the lines of America being built off of the peculiar industry, or it's either the peculiar industry or experience. But when you have an America built from chattel slavery, built from segregation, bigotry, then that inherently, along with like what back that up, which is the I'm against them or the I am better because, when you add that together, you understand, I think, where we come from and where we are now. But the tables can turn as quickly as a snap of the hat, you know what I'm saying? Whereas now the lower price labor force are for white people, or for this, or for Sikhs, or for Catholics, and whatever normal we knew is no more. And so that's why a lot of people don't necessarily look at workers' rights as their own rights, because inherently whiteness allows for that, the opportunity to be a higher price labor force worker before a lower price labor force worker. And when one has to be a lower price labor force worker, you are then using your whiteness in order to be better than the people who you are working with, which is why a lot of people who are in the same predicament as migrant workers, as Black and Latino citizens, I mean, for white folks, they're in the same position we are in, but they're voting for Trump. Because why? because whiteness, in essence, is the last protection between labor forces, and that's what was used to stratify labor forces when they were union busting in the early 20s and 30s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, like a lot of people were wondering why Fred Hampton was so popping, why people listened to this 21-year-old black man. People of all creed, color, races, religions listen to this one guy. Like, why? It was because he understood that the stratifications they were going to continue to make to further us was going to be economic. And that was something the quote-unquote poor, the quote-unquote oppressed could all relate to, get behind, and then want to change. But they killed him. And they kill a lot of us who try to move beyond racial stratification. You know, there's a difference between respecting history, knowing privilege and entitlement, but also understanding that racial stratification is a tactic. It is an economic tool used as a tactic to be able to widen the wage gap, create more money for the 1%, you know? I mean, I think there's a difference between, you know, knowing the history and context and nuance of it, but also being able to move past that in order to create a better framework, or destroying the framework for the people who have to live under it, you know? And I think that's where the unionization of workers, regardless if we're just talking about essential, quote-unquote, essential workers, or workers that have never even had a union, you know, like we can talk about delivery workers now. We can talk about, like you said, Instacart. We can talk about these third-party apps that are making money off of contractors and the businesses they're quote-unquote helping save, you know, with no rights, let's say, if they get sick, or, you know, it's super important. And I wrote that as sort of a reminder, you know, that the world moves as it does because workers bleed, sweat, die for a sense of normal, you know, and that sense of normal is very contextually specific to whoever, you know, is speaking on that normal.
Yeah, man, it's no joke. It's real life threatening. I mean, awareness. He works at a 7-Eleven, and he didn't even have a mask that they gave him. And my partner, she sewed him a mask, but he was terrified because he lives at home with his mom, or she lives with their family, and she's an elderly woman. And I was like, it's not worth it for you to be at 7-Eleven and risk your mom's life. You know, and he's hard. And you can see the value of unions and the money that's spent to attack them. Like Walmart has they have union busting forces. Amazon uses surveillance. Recently there was a strike that was, they found out was being surveyed by the military and the FBI helping the local police. I believe this was in Seattle. And it was a wildcat strike that was being, people were doing, and all these forces came together to fight that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to move on to your another article that you did. It's "We Are Not Your Soft White Underbelly," Mark Lando. And I thought this article was really powerful. It was emotional. I'm wondering if you've had a response from Mark Lando on it, or a response from other people. And then I think really something that really hit me was talking about you quoting here, Black pain, especially the societal caused agony of Black women. And I think about is like he was showing this pain, and I think something you were getting at is he wasn't also showing the agency, the humanity of these people. He was just kind of looking for clickbait off of pain, and then the added layers of oppression to that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you could speak on this article.
Yeah, no, it was something that I came across like by accident, honestly. And I think, especially the past like few years, I've just been, and I think a lot of Black people can attest to this. Like we've just been very much tired of being, like I'm tired of seeing Black pain, on social media. I mean, like if I'm just being pretty much honest, I mean, like every recent, I guess, impactful death of Black men and Black women and people in general have been shared, made to be an example, all from social media, and it has been either the linchpin within like the fight for justice for these individuals, or it has been sort of the antithesis of justice. And so it felt as though a college photographer just fresh off of their degree was trying to be edgy and quote unquote lend credence and voice to like the voiceless. And I feel as though that inherently is speaking from an experience in which you know nothing about, let alone believing these people as voiceless. I can understand the idea of what he was trying to do, but I think there is an inherently more tasteful way, especially if one is privileged or learned enough to apply a little bit of tact and a lot more respect, as well as like knowing the context of what it would be to show Black pain and Black suffering in such a visceral way through the white gaze. One that also doesn't allow for any sort of like resolution. And that's like, it's just like a good resolution, because the resolution is probably going to be that, she passes away from what she's afflicted with if she doesn't get help. And I felt as though I didn't like watching someone get likes, make money off of ads from our pain, our suffering, something in which, and under the guise of like lending credence, lending like a window into their lives. I mean, I thought it was incredibly offensive, and I thought it was terrible. I thought there are better ways, there are better ways to help. There are better ways to expose the ills of society. And a lot of that, a lot of what he shows, a lot of what he talks about can be addressed with help, but there's no visual representation of that help. Mm-hmm. There isn't. It's just this expose that doesn't do anything aside from show or it in essence like feeds into the stereotypes in which we believe are prevalent.
I really thought you brought up this good point about white savior models that you see with a lot of liberal artists too. And like this example is a prime example of that, of also the danger of there's this book called The Methodology of the Oppressed. They talk about academics in it, how a lot of academics go out in anthropology and they speak to marginalized communities, and then they go back, they write their paper, they get tenured, and they never interact with those communities again. It reminded me of that conversation. And you have a quote in here: "Black and white mugshot, like portraits of men, women, and trans folk stuck in a moment of cathartic release or despair, are reduced to just that, humanized only through a lens that lacks the space for duality from whom we're deemed worthy." It reminded me of this talk by the filmmaker Arthur Jaffa. And he speaks about the whiteness of the lens in certain instances, but also just the violence of having a lens, and how he noticed how it changed people in interviews.
Oh, yeah.
You could speak on that.
Well, just of how I think the lens is physical, and we think of it as a physical manifestation of society's eyes, right? And so if one is only seen through a certain lens for a certain amount of time, and the pictures don't allow for that lens to go beyond that millisecond of that picture, then that becomes the reality for society to deem either you worthy or not. And a lot of people realize that power, but don't necessarily realize that power. And I think a perfect example of this would be how prosecutors, how they always release the mugshot of the unarmed Black individual, or they try to find the most unflattering photo of the unarmed Black individual who was killed, because of the fact that will, I think, add or shift the narrative or context of that individual and their identity towards something in which is not only, like, sadly enough, more familiar, but more apropos to the framework of, like, what whiteness is and what Blackness is, you know?
Yeah, like when that swimmer who was a rapist. Brock Turner. Like they were showing his picture, and then you compare that to anyone in the book, like looking at Mike Brown, and these differences, like they're so glaring. And this was seen in Hurricane Katrina too. Like, are you getting food for your family if you're white? Are you looting if you're Black? Like all these things were broken open, and like the system exposes itself by trying to reproduce itself.
Yeah, it is a very fickle coin, you know, what contextual images can do or bring to a people, a movement, a society, a nation, you know, and how they can, you know, unite but also divide.
Mm-hmm. You were living in Tucson for a while, and I saw you had done a benefit concert for No Mas Muertes and No More Deaths, and I wanted to ask you about if you worked with No More Deaths and about colonialism, because I'm speaking to you from so-called Denver, and that's the homelands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho and Ute peoples, and Tucson is a lot of people call occupied Tucson. And I wanted to know if you speak about this a lot in your music too, like stolen land, and you speak on so many issues. But I wanted to ask you if you could speak about that, of living in Tucson and No More Deaths and colonialism as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, living in Tucson, I think, was such an eye-opener for me when it came to migrant rights and when it came to undocumented people's struggles, you know. No Mas Muertes was an organization I was lucky enough to be able to do some work with, do some shows, and that was really a privilege, but also, I guess, possible because of the brown folk who really make Tucson, you know. I think it was very eye-opening to see the parallels between the Black and brown experience, you know, down south. It was very interesting and very eye-opening, you know. Colonialism has a way of, it has like a form of erasure, you know. It can erase context, history, culture, and so being able to, I think, find that sort of form of representation, because obviously, like, you know, being a Black man is different than being Latino, but being under the same form of colonialization lends a lot of similarities and a lot of, like, credence towards intention and intention towards, like, true equality. And understanding that migrant rights, immigrant rights, are Black rights, are trans rights, or queer rights, then one can sort of, like, see the true intersectionality when the nuances present themselves. And I think living in Tucson, being privy to being next to people who run these organizations, who have family across the border, who live, I think, what a lot of our ancestors lived, I think it opens up a different world, a different form of empathy, a different form of understanding, and I think a greater sort of calling toward, you know, the form of, like, true equity, which is really economic freedom for all. And true economic freedom means representation. And I think one of the things, No More Deaths really wants to impart into people is that this may represent these people at this time, but understand there are people who came before and there will be people who come after who have created a sense of normalcy, but a sense of privilege or entitlement that you enjoy today because of where you live. I mean, I'm just a messenger,
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to have a platform to be able to, be a part of some really cool things, be a part of some very integral, important things,
Yeah, man, I just want to honor you for your artistry. And, just too many people get shout outs when they pass or something like that. But yeah, just grateful for this conversation and our relationship. And your songs like Facts and Love Cold are prime examples of this, of your skills as a MC and a writer and artist. And man, I love those tracks. And I guess my last question is, what are you working on now, and any projects you want to shout out, or where can people find your music and your art?
Oh, man. The last project I released was the LandoLasso album. Released that in May. It's up on Bandcamp and on all the streaming sites. If you want to check that out, check that out. But I got a new little single drop in June 5th with the homie Grey Goon. But as far as project-wise, I've got some exciting stuff coming down the pipe. A project with Teddy Rock's band, and then another album with Calvin Valentine. So I've been hustling. I've been working. I've been trying to put the pedal to the metal and really think, sort of level up. Level up on just the amount of influence or the amount of reach. Because it's all good when it's good music, but if people ain't hearing it, then what good can it do in whatever vacuum it's in, So really just working toward sort of solidifying the whole artistic framework of where I want to go and what I'm doing, as well as, kind of going back to the independent model, because that's in essence what I am. I'm independent right now. So going back to that, which is amazing in itself.
Nice. I can't wait to hear the new projects.
Only thing we gon' save is a piece gone. Stitched at the hand, nigga, lean low. Can't reach if you came for the steal out. On the line, trying to bang from the free throw. Only thing we gon' save is a piece gone. Stitched at the hand, nigga, lean low. Can't reach if you came for the steal out. On the line, trying to bang from the free throw. All top, got you tripping. Chill be the villain, all sleeves be the sin. Yeah, if y'all got willing, I'ma lead you to the billing of a whole new feeling. But the nigga not perfect, no. Never said I could. If I was, then I would. Whole gang for the good, but the nigga still a man. Is it worth it? Yes. Only if the wood burn good. We burn this bitch down for the last time. Figured it was past time overdue. Yeah. It's your soul looking over you, baby. Save is a piece gone. Stitched at the hand, nigga, lean low. Can't reach if you came for the steal out. On the line, trying to bang from the free throw. Only thing we gon' save is a piece gone. Stitched at the hand, nigga, lean low. Can't reach if you came for the steal out. On the line, trying to bang from the free throw.
is cold, it's bold, saying not to non-believers who depreciate the worth of this earth. And its keepers knew first, but that's a lesson y'all church can't teach, and mans can't preach. The land and sea done hit its reach. When it's all dead and gone, what will we see? When it's all dead and gone, what will we see? Yo, guess y'all heard that speech. While us black folk leave, our earth meets street. Our hurt man heat, and trigger fingers turn springer. That's for a jury to see, but they ain't helping the street, so they ain't walking with me. We been cooking up some justice, ain't no helping to see. So when it's all said and done, dead and gone, we gon' be resting in peace. Show love, carry on, and be the gold recipe. Fire light within dark, that be the test you can't see. Fire light within dark, that be the test you can be.
No, our love is cold. It's cold. The humans know that soul.
Love is bigger than the baddest motherfucker on this earth, and that's on God. But it can't stop a bullet to get a nigga a job. But it can rectify how you looking at all your odds. And maybe it can save me from giving up all I got, so soak it in. My queer homies gon' make it where we supposed to been. It's been said how you start when you never begin. I've been there, guess this love hasn't happiest end. Sing my songs and share them with many friends, yo. Write your wrongs and start reversing them trends. Cause every garden you tend to is within, and we be needing some bees, yo. A day full of ease, hemp papers and tree. It's all connected, well respected if you building through peace. But once a nigga always, and we gon' die for I say, black forever always. And at the end of the day, we still gon' die for I say, we still gon' die for I say.
It's cold, it's cold. The humans know that soul. No, our love is.
Those were two songs from Lando Chill. The first was Peace Corps from his album LandoLasso with the talented producer The Lasso, and the second song is Love Cold from his album Black Ego. Please check out his journalism linked in the show notes and buy his music on Bandcamp and stream it up. Please share the show around, support this podcast on Patreon, check out the other podcasts on the Channel Zero Network, and thanks to Awareness for the music.